We are very pleased to have Sardar Ahmad Nawaz Sukhera with us today. He is the Cabinet Secretary, Cabinet Division from April 2020 till January 2023. He did his BSc in Economics, Industry and Trade from London School of Economics in 1983, and during his time at LSE, he was the President of Pakistan Society from 1981 to 1982. He also played cricket for LSE from 1980 to 1983 and was awarded a Purple for it. He also has a Master's in Development Economics from Williams College, USA. He holds an MPA from Harvard University, USA. He was the Secretary of Commerce and Textile, Secretary of Board of Investment, Secretary Ministry of Information, Broadcasting and National Heritage, Secretary Privatization Division and Privatizing Commission, and he was also the Chief Executive Officer of Small and Medium Enterprise Development Authority of Pakistan. He has published articles in national publications on public policy. He has served under 23 governments over a period of 38 years, including working with 5 Prime Ministers as Federal Secretary for 9 years. In recognition of his services, the Government of Pakistan conferred the prestigious National Award of Hilal-e-Imtiaz on him. So I'm really glad to have him with us. Please welcome our guest speaker for today.
Should we begin? Yes. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for inviting me to this session. I begin with a confession. I'm not an academic. I was just interested in this subject. I was asked to speak at Premier Training Institute on this subject. I was amazed then as to why I was picked to speak on this subject. Maybe because I've spent a bit of time working with national leadership, so perhaps they wanted my views on it. So I think my submissions would raise more questions than provide answers, and perhaps that's also what I wish to do here. Just to think about the framework of looking at this topic, thinking about it in the Pakistani national perspective. Before I go into the presentation, I'd just like to share a video I received on WhatsApp, but it really touched a few chords, and I'd like to share that with you, and then we'll talk about the topic a little more.
We are the 5th largest country in the world in terms of population. Can anyone here name the first 4 for me? Just shout it out. Who do you think said number 1 in terms of population? China, 2nd, India, 3rd, USA, 4th, Indonesia, and we're sitting at number 5. So, does population really contribute towards economic growth and development? Hands up for yes? It should. So how much do you think these top 5 countries in terms of population contribute to world GDP? Just as a percentage. Any guesses? 75? What else? So 40 is close. So 45% of world GDP is contributed by the top 5 countries in terms of population. When we pick up the top 10 in terms of population, that's almost 60% of world GDP. So clearly there's something here. But what do you think Pakistan's contribution is to world GDP? I can't hear you. 3%? It's actually less than 0.4%. So let's think about that for a minute, right? The top 10 countries in the world in terms of population are contributing almost 60% of world GDP. We are at 0.4. What's happened? And I think this is where let's drill down into a little bit of micro here. Our labor force is about 70 million people. We talk about young labor force, we talk, we have 150 million people below the age of 30, but truly, how productive are they? Have we really invested in our labor force in terms of education, in terms of health, in terms of job availability, to be able to even push our labor force to be as productive as they need to be? And the second question we should ask ourselves is, what's the composition of our labor force? And I don't say this simply because I'm the only woman on this panel, is we have less than 20% of women represented in the entire labor force. So how on earth are 40, 50 million productive people meant to raise the welfare of 220 million people? It's not possible. So not only does our labor need to be more productive, there needs to be more of it. That means that we need to add more women. We need to add more individuals who can be at a certain caliber and at a certain stage of their lives where they can engage in productive businesses. So here's our challenge, and here's where I encourage you to imagine what would happen if we were able to move that 0.4 to just 0.8, just double our capacity. And that doubling our capacity will come from a wider labor force participation, greater productivity, investments in our labor force in terms of health, education, social welfare, etc. And what does that, just that 0.4 to 0.8, what does that mean for Pakistan? It will double our GDP from $350 billion to $700 billion. It will increase our middle class, which is currently about 20-25 million people, to almost 50 million people. And it will overall raise our understanding, our integration, our ability to relate to the world in a new way. So let's take this as our unimaginable goal and say, how are we going to just use this strength that we have given? It's a God-given strength, being number 5 in terms of the population metric, and say how can we double our own ability by investing in our own people. And I think that's the thought I'd like to leave you here with today, because ultimately any policy that we take on has to address this issue. And if it doesn't, then that 0.4 goes to 0.3, goes to 0.2, and effectively, despite being the 5th largest country in the world, we become slowly more irrelevant. We are
Thank you very much for listening to this video. I thought it was a very powerful video. But if I may ask you, which was the word repeated most often in her talk? Let me help you. She kept on saying we should do this, we should take these steps, we should decide on this. Who's we? When I got this video and I kept thinking that whatever she's saying is so powerful and she's absolutely correct. But who's the decision maker? I'm sure when she says we, she is referring to those people who make policies. Because those policies eventually either produce these results or don't produce these results. And we see these gaps which we would like to address. So in today's talk, I'd like to basically give you a framework to think about what that we should be doing. So I'll start off by suggesting a legal framework to look at this subject, and then talk about leadership. We'll talk about the details as we go. Next, please. Next. You see, people normally don't make a distinction between policy-making levels and operational levels. So bureaucracy gets blamed, everybody under the sun gets blamed for not reforming the system, for the policies to not be effective or correcting. So I went and checked out the federal government rules of business. Now the federal government as well as the provincial government function in accordance with the rules of business. That those lay down how the government business would be conducted. Under the rules of business, policy making is the domain of the federal cabinet and the provincial cabinets. Federal cabinet is headed by the Prime Minister, and the Supreme Court has defined federal government as Prime Minister and cabinet together. In the province, it's the chief ministers and their cabinets. So these are the governments, and they are responsible for policy making. Implementation of those policies, however, is the responsibility of the ministries at the federal government level and the provincial departments in the provinces and the organizations down below. These can be called operational level. Now, please remember this, and as we go into onto the next slides and in greater detail, please keep thinking about the situation you see on ground in Pakistan, and keep thinking of gaps in policy making, and keep thinking of the leadership which is duty bound to do the policy making. Next, please. Now, you might have noticed every time you meet or come across a leader or senior bureaucrat or from most organizations, everybody wants to give his own vision. My vision for the country, my vision for my ministry, my vision for my department, my vision for my Supreme Court or whatever is this. Ladies and gentlemen, in my humble view, that is absolutely incorrect. And today we are not talking of corporate sector, we are referring to the public sector here. The national vision has been given to us in the Constitution, clearly laid down in the Constitution. And as we all know, the Constitution is a unanimously accepted subject. If you allow me to just read out the preamble to the Constitution, whereas sovereignty over the entire universe belongs to Almighty Allah alone. I'm quoting different texts from the preamble. Wherein the state shall exercise its powers and authority through the chosen representatives of the people. There have to be chosen representatives of the people who will be exercising authority to make policies. You can't bypass this. Wherein the principles of democracy, freedom, equality, tolerance and social justice, as enunciated by Islam, shall be fully observed, wherein shall be guaranteed fundamental rights, including equality of status, of opportunity, and before all, social, economic, and political justice, and freedom of thought, expression, belief, faith, worship, and association, subject to law and public morality. So, these things are laid down as a vision for Pakistan, and it is I'm now going to actually share who the policy makers actually are in detail. But before I do that, let me also clear one confusion about, we keep hearing the state, this issue was against the state, this was an attack on the state. The state, becomes, how should I put it in an objective way, state becomes, is defined differently by different people. The Constitution clearly lays down, Article 7 of the Constitution, the state means the federal government, and I've just explained the federal government, the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, a Majlis-e-Shura, Parliament, a provincial government, a provincial assembly, and such local or other authorities in Pakistan as are by law empowered to impose any tax or cess. So it is the Prime Minister, the National Assembly, the Chief Minister, the provincial assemblies. That is defined as the state. Anybody else referring to any other institution is not going by what's laid down in the Constitution. Now, the Constitution guarantees certain fundamental rights, which are security of person, safeguards as to arrest and detention, for example, producing somebody arrested before the court within 24 hours, right to a fair trial, freedom of movement, freedom of assembly and freedom of association, freedom of speech, and so on and so forth. These are fundamental rights guaranteed by the Constitution, and all policy makers, the federal cabinet and PM, provincial CMs, and their cabinets have to make policies in accordance with the principles of policy which are again laid down in the Constitution, and present a report to the National Assembly and the provincial assemblies on annual basis that their policy making is in accordance with the principles of policy, which are basically guaranteeing the fundamental rights I briefly talked about. So this is how policy making is to be done. Is it being done in that way? I leave it to you to think about it. It lays down the vision, the state is defined, I've talked about fundamental rights being guaranteed, and all policy making has to be in accordance with to ensure fundamental rights, and how the policy making is to be done at the federal and provincial levels. Next please. Now, what kind of a leader, what kind of a we that Maheen mentioned in her video are we thinking about? Another confusion which I'd like to talk about is that there are certain authority figures who think they are leaders. Not all authority figures can be leaders. So, who are authorities? For example, government officers, civil, military, politicians holding public offices. They work as an authority according to some codified grant of certain powers and responsibilities over a specific group of people, area, or subject to specific person. Example by appointment of rank. If I'm a deputy commissioner in a district, my authority, my powers are defined. If I'm a colonel commanding a unit in army, the laws give me certain authority over the specified unit under my command. Or if I'm a DC, for example, then in the territorial jurisdiction of a district. That does not make me a leader. Why I say that is because a leader transcends authority and achieves a higher goal in accordance with the determined vision. In a previous talk, which I mentioned at the beginning, I asked 150 uniformed officers present in that session that all of you must have commanded a unit. But tell me honestly, how many can raise their hands and share with us that all men under their command would go and give their lives if they asked them to? Well, that has happened in history, even in Pakistan. But that is where the commanding officer transcended his given authority and showed certain leadership which made people to go beyond giving the legal obedience to the extent that they were willing to lay down their lives for the commanding officer. So, just wanted to make this distinction because people, by virtue of their rank or posting, start thinking of becoming we for the nation. That is not true. It has to be a leader who has to go higher than the authority given to him by rank and deliver. Next, please. So what does a strategic leader do? By the way, I think in most countries the word strategic is used mostly by or in a military context. You have strategic weapons, which are basically nuclear weapons, but you call them strategic weapons. You have a strategic planned division, which basically deals with nuclear this thing. On the civil side, I think, Mustafa, the only time I've really come across the word strategic is as Commerce Secretary, where we have the strategic trade policy framework. Otherwise, I guess we are shy of even now using the word strategic in a civilian context. But I went through dictionaries because I was sort of trying to understand what does the word strategic mean, and it basically meant key. Somebody who can take key decisions, who has got key powers to do something, critical powers. But we use the word strategic here. He is one who plans, leads, and executes work to successfully fulfill, again, the strategic goals of an organization or of their own team. They are future focused and have a vision for what they want the team to work towards and where they want to go. 5 stages of the process: goal setting, situation analysis, strategy formulation, implementation, monitoring and evaluation. But before I go to the last bullet, I'd just like to present you another framework where one can think of a strategic leader as somebody who works on 2 axes. On one axis, he has or she has the historical perspective of a situation and a desire for a certain future scheme of things with regard to that thing. That is one axis. And the other axis is the organizational or national value system psyche, traditions. Because after all, decision making has to be in consonance with your own situation also. So these things become important. Last bullet. Now this is, I found this very interesting in the academic material I found. Lead types of leadership, and this is why I said keep thinking while I'm talking of this, these issues. Keep thinking of our own leadership. Transactional leaders. They're good at, some of them are really good at making deals, solving political problems, solving or resolving civil military issues. Some are charismatic, even to the extent of having a cult following. But how many of them that we've had have been transformational leaders who have transformed the country? What Mahim was talking in her video, if we did this, it would end up in doubling our GDP. If we did this, it would. That is the kind of transformation thing. Which of our leaders can we think of who was transformation? We'll come back to this in the next slides. Next please. Now, thinking of the national scene, a strategic leader at a critical position, his most important job for the nation is to ensure national security. But what kind of challenges do they face? To me, national security is a function of multiple variables. Rule of law for the society to function in an organized manner. Personal security, person and property. Economic security for each individual or for most of us. Territorial security. I'm not going to talk about either people putting up fences on one border to ensure that we don't get there, or us putting fences on some other border so that they don't enter our country. Food security. We think of ourselves as an agrarian economy, yet we import wheat now, we import a lot of food stuff including dals, we even import sugar. Energy security, water security, ethnic security. So national security, unless we ensure all these security of all these variables, national security is going to be a distant dream. Next please. Now, looking at specific things, strategic leadership faces some external challenges. India, unless the Kashmir issue, illegally occupied, Indian occupied Kashmir, issue is resolved, which leader would go for, a different set of ball game with India? The serious issues of water sharing. Then the rise of BJP with its RSS ideology in India, which is akin to rebirth of the Nazi Party. Regional dynamics, global power games in the region. We are all familiar with this, so I'm not going to go into the details. Internal terrorism and the aftermath of war on terror. I mean, we lost a colonel yesterday. We lose 5, 10, 15 soldiers every day. Rule of law, fundamental rights. I started my talk from fundamental rights, property rights, commercial disputes. What is the state of law in Pakistan? Our judiciary ranked right at the bottom of the ladder. And I think we are 129th out of 140? 136, even better, sir, unfortunately. Fundamental rights, I dare not speak about them. Economy, public revenues, debt, expenditures. By the way, we keep hearing about revenue shortfalls and increased taxation. I haven't heard much about any expenditure cutting to balance the equation. Basic problem, shortage of US dollars because we don't have anything worthwhile to export unless we heavily subsidize a few sectors. Geostrategic location. Honest to God, you guys are much younger than us. I think इतने होंगे तब से दो ही चीजें सुन रहे हैं, या हसास मोड़ से गुजर रहे हैं या हमारी बड़ी जियोस्ट्रेटेजिक लोकेशन. We are actually facing this challenge, and I'll talk about it later, how it could have been an opportunity and what an opportunity lost by not thinking of the geostrategic location as a long-term policy to encash the geostrategic location. Next please. National harmony. We all know these things. Civil-military relationship, militancy. 42 million people, you know the level of education. By the way, growing at 2.55% annual growth rate. I sat in the federal cabinets for 9 years as a federal secretary. Not once did I hear the word population planning. Not once. That is, the youth bulge and what have you, and you think it's going to be a bonanza for Pakistan. God save us. The level of education, the quality of health services, the kind of social protection. I was talking about fundamental rights and principles of policy. They say that every Pakistani has to be given social protection. Either change the constitution or do your policy making in accordance with the dictates of the constitution. Industrialization, technological adoption, including artificial intelligence. Honestly, when I wrote artificial intelligence here, that was just to take a box. कोई सोचता है यहाँ पे कि artificial intelligence, agricultural transformation, some English, but these are problems. Fifth generation warfare, yes, because that affects morale of the society. And confidence in the state. आज कितने लोगों को स्टेट इंस्टीट्यूशंस पे कोई सीरियस कॉन्फिडेंस है कि they will be able to meet with the challenges I've listed here or on the back page, and I've just listed a few. And of course, policy consistency has never been there. एक गवर्नमेंट आती है, पिछले को उड़ा देती है, सारा अपनी नई चीजें ले आती है, and it happens every time. So next please. So, given these challenges, what kind of attributes should a strategic leader have? I think his power to analyze things, his capacity to understand the situation in which the society and organization finds itself. पहले तो उसे वो comprehend करने की situation हो, and then ability to devise a strategy to manage the present and shape the future. Strategy making, skill in moving the society towards elevated purposes, और उसे implementation करें. मतलब underpass बनाना ठीक है, motorway बनाना ठीक है. Strategic key issues, please, while I'm talking, keep thinking what are the strategic issues confronting Pakistan. Are motorways and underpasses the only problems we have as a nation? Maybe in a locality, yes. In a region, sure. But we are talking about the national level. Readiness to rectify shortcomings, adjustments, reforms, U-turns, many care. Quick on your feet. If you're doing monitoring and evaluation properly, you can readjust to external and internal change in dynamics. Indispensable faith in future, self-belief. that I will do this for the country. We will do this for the country. सारा टाइम डराते ही ना रहे, हालात बहुत खराब हैं, हम बड़े हसास नाजुक मोड़ से गुजर रहे. Willingness to enlarge this affair of concern from self to society. Evoke generosity of public spirit which inspires sacrifices and service, earns people's confidence. Why are people willing to give gold and jewelry and money to Idisa? Which of our political leaders would evoke that kind of confidence कि नहीं ये बंदा मुल्क के लिए ये करेगा? So you see, these are the attributes. Do we find them in our leaders? I am not making up any political, speech or argument, but ये चीजें तो होनी चाहिए. Next please. Now, whatever I've spoken about, I'd like to take 5 minutes on this. Kuch many case studies I thought are helpful. Qaid-e-Azam, he created Pakistan through a constitutional battle, fighting it up on the table, never raising his voice, never painting a stone, never calling a strike. It was all arguments. A padha likha barrister, power of argument, power of law, power of convictions. Margaret Thatcher. At least some of us were at LSE during that time, and we suffered at her hands because ours was the first year when she made a distinction between home student fee and overseas student fee. I think हमारी कितनी 850 pounds हो गई थी पहले साल 2000 हो गई थी और home students की was like 600. So we hated her at that time. But fact of the matter is, if you look at Margaret Thatcher coming in mid 70s, a little after that, before her, Britain had lost its global power prestige. India निकल गया और काफी सारी colonies निकल गई. The economy, for the first time, they had to go to the IMF and get a loan. I think current day में it was like a 20 billion pound loan. जो ego थी कि they had a fixed exchange rate and they never. Britain going in for a devaluation, going for a loan, inflation, load shedding. The load shedding in Britain of 1970s was far worse than we've had in Pakistan. The inflation was also there. International prestige was absolutely. The first thing she did was resurrect Britain's seat on the global power table. The Falklands War thing happened, we were at LSE at that time. Now, Falklands Islands, if I recall correctly, are about 8,000 miles away. All the military leadership and political leadership didn't want anything to do with it. The Argentinians had taken over those islands. Falklands was just like 300 kilometers from Argentina, and people said don't waste money on it. She alone took the decision, no, Britain will recapture it. And she did. The result was, you see, international powers, global powers are recognized by their ability to interfere in any part of the world. So the Navy becomes very important. So going 3,000 miles to get a pretty much useless small territory, recapturing it, was just to ensure the international prestige as an international player. And she did that. You see, this is the time after Second World War, Britain's prestige was going down. USA had emerged on one side, USSR was coming up on the other side, height of Cold War. Britain was known as the sick man of Europe. So the strategy of conviction, she won back the place, the old place on the international table for Britain. And she had a very harsh economic program, a very strong privatization program. And she brought Britain out of those economic programs. Anwar Sadat, strategy of transcendence. You see, Egypt's case is very interesting. It had been a Mediterranean affiliated power. It had Arab presence, an African leadership role. But then two new things happened just before Anwar Sadat came into power. Gamal Abdel Nasser was a charismatic leader, a very popular leader. And he was a leader of the non-aligned movement, which was basically pro-Russia, pro-socialist. And secondly, a pan-Islamism movement came up. Now he freed himself from those two, what he thought were restrictive things in a historical perspective, and went for peace with Israel. Can you imagine any country? And by the way, this is after the 1967 war's humiliation of the Arabs by Israel, and they had lost a lot of land. He actually engineered the 73 war, got back Sinai and a lot of other areas. Why? Because he wanted to negotiate peace from a position of strength. He went into a war to negotiate peace from a higher pedestal. So that was a strategy which he used. And from then now, the relationship may not be very comfortable. I've been to Egypt so many times. It's not very cordial, but they've learned to take advantage or whatever, actually very great economic, things which came their way because of this peace war. Likoni, छोटा सा शहर, it gets independent. Multiple ethnicities, Indian, Malayan, Chinese, ethnic problems. Best known at that time for malaria. Britain had a naval port because of the problems with, their own economic problems. Late 60s, they said by 71, I think, they said we are going to close our naval port also. So Singapore had nothing. What does he do? He had no natural resource, no oil, no gold, no nothing, no agriculture. He analyzed and said, I will convert my pretty much useless people as my biggest asset. So he converted his population from a liability into an asset. भाई मैं 24 करोड़ को क्या अपना asset समझूं? Do we have a policy to convert those 24 crore भूखे नंगे अनपढ़? यही है ना? Let's face facts. Ethnically divided, politically fractured, economically impoverished. Unless we decide कि नहीं है, माही ने कहा था ना, if the लेबर फोर्स इंक्रीज, भाई इनकी प्रोडक्टिविटी है क्या? हर बंदे को, when I came back from LSE, my second posting was AC Firozwala. I had a BSc degree. My PA had 2 MAs and an LLB. My PA. Now, what was the worth of those degrees? I think एक पंजाबी में भी थी शायद और एक उर्दू में होगी या whatever. So, मैं ये ट्रांसफॉर्मेटिव लीडरशिप की बातें कर रहा हूँ, नॉट ट्रांजैक्शनल डील मेकर्स. Can you imagine somebody changing the course of a country like China after Mao's revolution? Seeing what Lee Kuan Yew had done by opening up its economy for FDI after Mao, इसने SEZs बनाई Southern China में, foreign investment FDI को encourage किया, open up किया, and that is why he's called father of modern China. We changed the very, ethos of the Chinese society after the Mao years. So, leadership, strategic leadership की बात करनी है, इनकी करें. Otherwise, it's all talk. आगे देखिए. So, before I make you guys go to sleep completely, many of the conclusions, the more I think about this issue, my conclusions are very simple. We have absolutely, English के अंदर tone down कर दिया. The state of rule of law. How many are? I would like to challenge your intelligence by talking bullshit about the state of rule of law here. So we all know structural reforms in all sectors are vitally important and urgently required. क्यों नहीं होती भाई? क्यों नहीं होती? Pakistani society is socially fractured and politically polarized. Requires a bombing touch, immediate healing. Do we have a leader like Lee Kuan Yew जो इकट्ठा करे सारों को? Policy making and policy oversight is the domain of parliamentarians. I began my presentation with this, that according to the rules of business, policy making is the role of the PM and federal cabinet, provincial CMs and provincial cabinet. I leave it to your good judgment to consider how good or bad or how effective or ineffective they are. Last slide please, next. So, मेरी तो एक बड़ी clear recommendation. We are not going anywhere. We are going to keep, at best, keep cycling hard, but on an exercise bike, not going anywhere, unless somehow we again, or the quality of parliamentarians improves, so that policy making improves. And the second role of parliamentarians, to hold the executive government accountable, executive oversight. This has to be if this is done, everything else, all the other jigsaw pieces of the puzzle fall into place. Unless this is done, we'll keep hearing of small little efforts here or there, which in totality, I'm afraid, won't be much. So I'm sorry I took a little longer, 10 minutes longer than I planned, but one doesn't get audience as educated and you were kind enough not to sleep. Tomorrow मैंने नहीं बोला. So thank you very much for being such a lovely audience. And Q&A?
No, I just want to request everyone on if you have questions or comments, so we can start with that.
Yeah, this is what I'm saying. Feel free to ask anything. I'll sidestep political things because मैंने तो एक framework दिया है, and this is a framework which, with the best of intentions, I devised it myself. I'd be very, very happy and grateful if you can add to what I've submitted here today, so that we can improve the discourse maybe next time we discuss it. Sir.
Thank you so much for this insightful talk. Extremely inspiring. So you mentioned youth bulge, or of course we talk about how the majority of the population in the country is youth, and it sounds like as if it's an asset. जो कि वो बन भी सकता है if they have opportunities to be involved in political, social, economic stuff. But we believe that it's becoming more like a liability, and this liability then even contributes towards violence and even social unrest. एक मिनट में इकट्ठा कर लेता है कोई भी politician धरना करने के लिए. So my point is कि how do we ensure that this youth, the majority of the population, actually becomes an asset, or there are opportunities for them to become leaders, transformative leaders, strategic leaders, charismatic leaders. Let's just take politics for an example. UK, maybe we've got students' union, and that is exactly how students get involved in politics. They understand how democracy works. But इधर तो वो भी banned है just because we probably confuse a political student wing with a students' union, which is not the case. So you said quality of parliamentarians has to improve. But how do we give access to these young people that they can become leaders if they don't have a family member who's in politics, or if they're not multimillionaires? So
it's a very valid concern actually that you raised through your question. I'd like to take you back to the fundamental rights I started my lecture with. Please read Article 1 to 40 of the Constitution. I beg you, just for information, read Article 1 to 40 of the Constitution. If, fundamental rights include education, include freedom of speech, include freedom of association. And as I said, all policies have to be made in accordance with the principles of policy which guarantee these fundamental rights basically. So it is actually a constitutional violation happening when these rights are not being given. So what do? Our lawyer friends would take the matters to the courts. The courts की क्या हालत है, we've already discussed. So it's a catch-22 situation. Why I am saying parliamentarians? Because the constitution and the rules of business give them the responsibility of policy making. अगर वो ठीक होंगे तो आपकी पॉलिसीज ठीक होंगी. मेरी तो बेसिक थीसिस ही है. No secretary, no army chief, no deputy commissioner, no IG are responsible legally for policy making. They are operational officers. They are authorities. Some higher authority, some lower authority. But जो policy making है, that is to be done by parliamentarians. और अगर वो ठीक नहीं है, तो जो opposition के parliamentarians हैं, उनका काम ही parliamentary oversight है. This is why I have given it so much thought. Honest to God, it's my experience that if the minister is good, educated, upright, he'll get a secretary of a similar kind, and they'll form a good team. The policies would improve, the implementation would improve. You have a minister who's not very high on integrity, or international exposure lack करता है, नियत कुछ और है, he'll get a secretary of the same kind too, and then policy making does not remain the top priority. So unless I'm not forcing my views. मैंने तो जितना सोचा है इस लीगल फ्रेमवर्क और कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल फ्रेमवर्क में रहते हुए, I am convinced it has to be better parliamentarians. Why not people like you? You know, हम में से कितने हैं जो यहाँ से काउंसलर का इलेक्शन भी लड़ेंगे? Because आपने सिस्टम किसने ठीक करना है? लॉ बनानी है ना, पार्लियामेंट में फिर लॉ नहीं बनेगा, फिर रूल्स नहीं बनेंगे टू इनकरेज दिस। जहां करने होते हैं, अभी अपील का राइट देना था तो 12 बंदे बैठे हुए थे पार्लियामेंट के अंदर, और सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने भी अपहोल्ड कर दिया वो मैप लॉ की चेंज को। सो जहां नियत होगा हो जाती हैं चीजें, इनमें क्यों नहीं हो रही हैं? यू आर एब्सोल्युटली करेक्ट इन हाईलाइटिंग। I share your frustration. I'm sorry I have no answers.
Thank you so much.
Sir,
Sir, as you say, I feel blessed that we have a beautiful constitution. What good is the constitution that most fundamental rights are being violated? I used to believe that the constitution is violated because of the judiciary. If they can't do anything, where do we go? This is the question.
sir, I wish I had answers. Let me share with you an experience. How are the judges to the superior judiciary recruited? The constitution says that all positions of grade 17 and above are to be the recruitment has to be made through public service commissions. The High Court judges were previously selected basically by the chief ministers, recommended more or less in all the cases by the High Court chief justices, and you know these are political appointments. You would see, you know, let me put it in another way. How many High Court or Supreme Court judges have the kind of academic qualifications that some of the lawyers sitting in this room have? तो फिर उनसे एक्सपेक्टेशन भी वही होगी ना, 136 somebody mentioned out of 140th नहीं होगी. The whole system is rigged. But again, at least the present Chief Justice of Pakistan at least has laid down one thing in this one of these judgments कि जी ठीक है, पार्लियामेंट करेगी डिसीजन मेकिंग, इस पे लॉ बना सकती है. तो पार्लियामेंट अगर फुल कोर्ट और हाफ कोर्ट, यू नो, मैंने तो उससे पहले वो चाय का ही सुना था, फुल कप या हाफ कप, उस वाले में लेजिस्लेट कर सकती है. तो व्हाई नॉट ऑन इंप्रूविंग क्वालिटी ऑफ जजेस? इवेंचुअली डिसीजन मेकिंग उनकी अपनी क्वालिटी पे भी आएगी ना जी. बट हु इज रिस्पॉन्सिबल फॉर लॉ मेकिंग? इसीलिए जितना मर्जी मैं सोचूं, आई कीप कमिंग बैक टू द क्वालिटी ऑफ पार्लियामेंटेरियंस. It's always dangerous letting friends ask questions.
Thank you so much for being here. But just on the point of quality of politicians or parliamentarians, I think there's a very important avenue of political participation that we ignore consistently. I think, and it's not part of our public debate as much, which is local governments. And one of the reasons that we regularly hear as a cause of no local governments is कि जी ब्यूरोक्रेसी नहीं आने देगी. लाहौर का डीसी क्या करेगा अगर लाहौर का मेयर बन गया? You know, stuff like that. So, you know, I actually want to sort of understand from an insider's perspective, you know, what is the roadblock? Because I mean, we know that every government that comes into power comes with their own version of local government ordinance or an act or a law, whatever. I think every 4 years we've had a new revision. Someone says Musharraf's version was very good. Someone says PTI's version was very good. but what actually is the cause? Because just on the larger point of the fact that Pakistan isn't working, a big reason is that our cities aren't working. Our cities don't work economically, they don't work for the citizens, they don't work for the youths. So local government's crucial for urban reform, which in turn is central to any reform that we might want to undertake. So what's the major stumbling block?
You see, it's very interesting that everybody wants devolution of powers from above to their level, but nobody wishes to let go of their powers to down below. Devolution from the federation to the provinces was successful. NFC award bhi usi tarah se, it gives absolutely amazing amount of financial resources now, actually unfairly perhaps, to the provinces. But the problem is that the political leadership of the provinces do not wish to let go of their financial muscle and administrative powers down to the local government level. You see, not because I'm a bureaucrat. मैं आपको एक चीज बड़ी इंटरेस्टिंग बताऊं, and it's been a sore point too. I wish bureaucracy was really as powerful as people think it is. You see, if you were, and let's think of it as a rational person being a chief minister, what would a rational person sitting as chief minister do? He would like to get powers from the federal government. He would like to get monies from the federal government. And he would like to create his own goodwill in the province. Basic problem ye hai. I was asked to comment on a paper on this theme by an international organization, no names. Only like 3-4 days ago, I emailed them my comments on this issue. And this is precisely what I shared my diagnosis of it too. Who's stopping it going to powers below? Why did you mention DC or Commissioner? Because you know those names. Were provincial finance commissions formed? Were provincial finance commission awards made? And the best part, which I pointed out in that paper too, I'm glad I recalled, was property taxation, for example, has been given to the Tehsil municipal administration, right? Do they have a taxation service of any note? The federation has federal services. The provinces have provincial management services. Fairly decent. Local governments आप खड़ी करना चाहते हैं without having a good local council, local government service. Architects, town planners, sanitation experts. You see? कैसे होगा? Wishful thinking ठीक है. And the easiest thing is कि bureaucracy नहीं होने देती. Because bureaucracy can't reply back to you. It's a punching bag on behalf of the powers, whether in shalwar kameez or khakis. Decision makers दूसरे हैं, आप बोली जाए जवाब तो bureaucracy दे नहीं सकते. I think it is an unfair criticism and actually an unfair assessment of the powers they wield. On a lighter note, serious होगी ना बातें, थोड़ा सा आपको बताता हूँ. मौलवी की और ब्राह्मण की सबसे ज्यादा वैल्यू किस बात पे? एनी आइडिया? मौलवी की इसलिए कि उसने निकाह भी पढ़ा है और उसने नमाज जनाजा भी पढ़ा है, और ब्राह्मण ने वही मंत्र उसने अपनी जुबान में पढ़ने हैं. So bureaucracy know the mantra of government rules and regulations. So whenever they wish to throw a spanner in the works, because the quality of politicians isn't good, they use those to throw a spanner in the works. This again brings me back to my conclusion and my only recommendation. that if the quality of parliamentarians is good, even ये जो छोटी मोटी चलाकियां बंदा इमेजिन करता है, देखता है, गैप मिलता है ना. If there is a gap, वैक्यूम तो एग्जिस्ट नहीं करेगा, उसे कोई ना कोई एक्सप्लॉइट करेगा. तो ब्यूरोक्रेसी भी कर लेती है, बट डोमिनेंट प्लेयर नहीं है. डोमिनेंट, यू गो बैक टू द पार्लियामेंटेरियन. हाउ डेयर एनीबडी एल्स डू इट इफ द पार्लियामेंटेरियंस हैव द नॉलेज एंड द विल पावर टू ट्रांसफॉर्म द सिस्टम. मैं ट्रांसफॉर्मेशनल पे इसलिए तो इतना मैंने टाइम स्पेंड किया. हम ट्रांजैक्शनल लीडर्स हैं हमारे. वो गेम डालो, वोट लो, वोटरों को चक्कर दो, ट्रांजैक्शन है, आ जाओ, सीवरेज बना देंगे, ये कर देंगे, खंभे फेंक देंगे, बिजली आए ना आए, इलेक्शन से पहले खंभे फेंक दो, वोट मिल जाए. दीज आर ऑल ट्रांजैक्शनल पीपल. This is why I spoke at length about hoping for, wishing for, looking for transformational leadership. Madam,
9 साल जब आप कैबिनेट में थे, क्या
मैं
ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन,
कैबिनेट में नहीं था, I was secretary attending cabinet.
जब आप अपने ओहदे पर थे, आप क्या ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन लेकर आए? हम आपकी कहानी सुनना चाहते हैं.
मैडम, वो टॉपिक से हट जाता है. और नंबर वन, ब्यूरोक्रेसी. दिस इज व्हाट आई स्टार्टेड ऑफ विद. Bureaucracy is a very limited role defined for each post according to the authority given to it. You know, as cabinet secretary, for example, आपने क्योंकि बात कर ली है, मैं आधे मिनट में खत्म करता हूँ. 2-3 काम जो मेरे काम नहीं थे, मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ IT के काम थे, हो नहीं रहे थे. The Prime Minister gave those to me. One, हमने कैबिनेट को पेपर बेस्ड कैबिनेट मीटिंग्स, एजेंडाज, समरीज, मिनटिंग, ये वो, उससे हम ई कैबिनेट सिस्टम पे ले, इलेक्ट्रॉनिक पे. ओनली द कॉस्ट ऑफ पेपर सेव was 50 million at least a year. ये वो इस समय जो कैबिनेट में है, जो मिनिस्ट्रीज में बार बार बन रही है और ठीक हो रही है, और ये वो लगा, मतलब ये सिर्फ पेपर की सेविंग थी. देन द सेकेंड टास्क गिवन टू मी वाज कि पेपरलेस एनवायरनमेंट ऑफ मिनिस्ट्रीज करें. So there's been a program going on, e-office program. उसे हमने सारी फेडरल मिनिस्ट्रीज के अंदर इम्प्लीमेंट किया. बट उसकी अब आपको दूसरी साइड भी बताता हूँ. Some cabinet members, we got tablets for the cabinet which were फौजी स्टाइल. आर्मी के पास वो भी नहीं, वो जैसी किस्म की नहीं थी. वो sort of field tablets, पता चलता था कि फौजी चीज है. They wouldn't even keep the passwords. They didn't. Some of them didn't even know how to open it, how to say, go through these things. But ये realities हैं. So उनके PS करते थे. जब PA करते थे तो लीकेजेस भी हो जाती थी. अब despite that, हमने watermarking हर, I think there were 105 or so tablets given to secretaries and ministers and concerned officers. उससे पहले टीवी पे अक्सर कैबिनेट की समरी चल रही होती थी. Now these are all secret documents. हमने हर टैबलेट को, स्क्रीन को वाटरमार्क कर दिया. After that, not once, क्योंकि पकड़े जाते हैं. If I was secretary cabinet, मेरा PA कोई तस्वीर खींच के किसी जर्नलिस्ट को देता है कुछ, तो वो सेक्रेटरी कैबिनेट में उस पर लिखा हुआ है. So these are small little things. As Commerce Secretary, China Pakistan FTA मेरे टाइम पे, it's not one person. Look Africa policy implement की, GSP plus ये किया, रिन्यू हुआ उसमें रशिया के साथ यूएसएसआर के ब्रेकडाउन के बाद से बार्टर ट्रेड का वो इशू था, रिजॉल्व नहीं हो रहा था थैंक्स टू द कोर्ट्स में जारी केसेस से। आर्मी हेल्प्ड अस अ लॉट इन दैट पर्टिकुलर केस। अपनी बायोग्राफी में मैं लिखूंगा, पाकिस्तान वाज थैंक्ड बाय द रशियन पार्लियामेंट बिकॉज वी बिकेम द फर्स्ट कंट्री इन द वर्ल्ड व्हिच रिजॉल्व दैट इशू। एंड देन फॉर द नेक्स्ट 7 days मॉस्को के मेन पेपर में वो स्टोरी किसी न किसी फॉर्म में आ रही थी। एंड आफ्टर दैट because we became a model for Russia to settle other barter trade issues with all the other countries because उनकी तो barter trade basis पे। So you know हम bureaucrats ये stories बाहर नहीं लाते। It is the political leadership जो ये credit लेती है। हमें we are supposed to be the silent workers because you'd asked me a question. It's with a lot of embarrassment that I have to share this, but it's not our work. मतलब हम तो वर्कर्स हैं। सम पीपल लाइक टू ग्लोरीफाई देमसेल्व्स टू मच। अगर आई वाज वेरी लकी बाय द वे, इफ एनीबडी गेट्स अ सेंस कि मैं कोई पॉलिटिशियंस को बिलिटल कर रहा हूँ, डिमीन कर रहा हूँ, नॉट एट ऑल। आई हैड वेरी गुड रिलेशनशिप, वर्किंग रिलेशनशिप विद ऑल द 5 प्राइम मिनिस्टर्स आई वर्क विद। द 2 मिनिस्टर्स आई हैड वर ऑनेस्ट and very capable. One of them was an IBM senior executive, retired as CFO of IBM MENA region, and the other person too was foreign educated. Upright the, dynamic the, and we had a fantastic working relationship. But on one occasion, 5 secretaries came to me. Because I was the senior most, so junior secretaries थे, those frustrated होके आए, cribbing about the integrity and demands placed by their ministers. So they came to me. I said, "Yeah, what hell? Go and speak to the Prime Minister." They had tried that but didn't succeed. So they said, "Sir, you are senior, कुछ ना कुछ तो करें." What did I do? You know, अगर आपके जूनियर्स आपके पास आके वो एक ट्रस्ट, एक कॉन्फिडेंस के साथ शेयर करते हैं, एंड आई वाज जस्ट फर्स्ट अमंगस्ट इक्वल्स। कैबिनेट सेक्रेटरी चेयर्स द सेक्रेटरीज कमेटी, सो ही इज द सीनियर मोस्ट पर्सन, थोड़ा सा वो आ जाता है। आई वेंट टू द आर्मी चीफ एंड आई सेड, सर, दिस इज व्हाट हैज हैपेंड, प्लीज हैव दीज मिनिस्टर्स pulled up a little. This is not all. अब हम सबको अपने अपने फॉर्मूलाज ढूंढने पड़ते हैं सर्वाइवल के। क्या करें, सिस्टम तो है नहीं। मैंने तो सारा आपके सामने यही कहा कि देयर इज नो सिस्टम। इफ यू आर करप्ट, मेक एज मच hay as you can while the sun shines. If you are honest, the system doesn't protect you. I resorted to Ayatul Kursi. मैं तो बचपन से वही पढ़ता था और तो पढ़ता कुछ नहीं, लेकिन अल्लाह अल्लाह करके अपना टाइम काटा। देयर इज नो प्रोटेक्शन इन द सिस्टम। आई हैव some of my colleagues from the government sector are here. Maybe they can add to what I have said. They may agree with me, they may not, but मेरा एक्सपीरियंस तो यही है, सिस्टम्स ही नहीं है कोई। इसीलिए तो मैं बार बार इस चीज पे जाता हूँ कि पार्लियामेंटेरियंस अगर अच्छे आएंगे तो आपकी पॉलिसी मेकिंग ठीक होगी, ये चीज़ें ठीक होंगी, और गवर्नमेंट वर्किंग की पार्लियामेंट्री ओवरसाइट ठीक होगी। वाई डू वी से नैब खत्म करते हैं? पुराने प्राइम मिनिस्टर्स कह रहे हैं नैब खत्म करते हैं। भाई, नैब एक्ट ऑफ द पार्लियामेंट से बनी है ना, तो पार्लियामेंट खत्म कर दे, उसे ठीक कर दे, क्यों नहीं होता? सॉरी।
Questions at 7 p.m. we'll all gather for a group photograph, and उसके बाद we'll sort of have our chit chat during the tea.
जी, Mr. Gentleman.
Late, my apologies, stuck at work. I'm catching up late. I just wanted to seek your, just views that we are a poor country, but when we look at, the overall setup of the corridors of power, you see, it seems that there is, no sensitivity towards expense control. I mean, generally it seems to the common public that there's a lot of extravagance. Do you think that's something, which needs a significant improvement, and how can that, shift come about? Because, and that's been going on for decades. आपने खुद काम किया है 5 prime ministers के साथ, but it doesn't seem that, someone is really, rocking the boat.
I totally agree with you. In one of my earlier slides, I touched upon this thing. The focus is always on raising revenues, tax net widening, rightly so, but we end up taxing the already taxed down to the bones. Yes, the salaried class. We talk of getting new loans. We are actually getting loans to pay our debt. Technically, we're bankrupt. If I was in government and I was traveling in a 600 AMG Merc, I would feel very, very ashamed. You see, I don't know about you guys. Hamara LSE mein, the three of us here, the first year we had a Tory union. That was the first time Conservative union, the LSE mein. Otherwise, though, LSE was known as a leftist institution, student movement was taking. So, despite my agrarian roots, I've always been left of the center, to put it mildly. मुझे याद है, as a young officer, I'd just come back from Harvard, grade 18, 20-something, and I was appointed PSO to Chief Minister of Punjab. So 7 Club Road GOR, इससे हम निकले, and the Chief Minister, उसकी बर्थ में CM साहब लेफ्ट में पीछे बैठे हुए थे, मैं राइट पे बैठा हुआ। डेविस रोड जाके हमें एयरपोर्ट के लिए राइट टर्न करना था। जब हम एयरपोर्ट के लिए राइट टर्न किए, तो youngster with the Chief Minister, the pomp and show and the hooters and the lights and blah blah blah. मेरा एक क्लास फेलो पहली गाड़ी में वो 3 किलोमीटर तक उन्होंने वो गाड़ियों लाइन रोकी हुई, वो खड़ा हुआ था। And the moment I couldn't wait because I was sitting with the CM. The moment I gave him a smile, उसने मैं यहाँ पर कर नहीं सकता था, तो उसने मुझे इशारा किया। But on another note, the same Chief Minister, we used to say that Pakistan Standard Time, you ask people to come in at 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. would be the Pakistan Standard Time people, 1 hour behind the given time. हमने उनका CM Standard Time रखा हुआ था, another 1 hour behind Pakistan Standard Time. So 2.5 घंटे की चीज थी. We could get the PIA aircraft delayed even for up to 45-50 minutes. अब लोग अंदर बैठे हैं CM साहब के लिए बैठे। एक बंदा, luckily I was not with the Chief Minister on that particular day. बड़ा famous ये papers में भी आया। CM को पड़ गया कोई बंदा जहाज के अंदर। You made us wait, who are you, blah 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 blah. अगली दफा इस्लामाबाद हम गए, I was on duty. We had to take a commercial flight back. और CM Punjab government के aircraft was on maintenance, away for maintenance. So half an hour before the given time that we had to move to the airport, the Chief Minister calls me and tells me कि यार वो अहमद वो जरा टाइम पे निकल चलिए। अच्छा, I had heard the story कि क्या हुआ था, मैंने भी चस्का लिया, again 20 something you enjoy these things, at least I did. मैं कैसे खैरियत है, क्या हुआ जी? अच्छा, he thought कि maybe मैंने एक्टिंग ठीक की, he said, "Oh, ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਨਹੀਂ ਪਤਾ ਪਿਛਲੀ ਵਾਰੀ ਉਹ ਪਾਗਲ ਜਿਹਾ ਉਹ ਫਲਾਣਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ ਨਾਮ ਲਿਆ ਉਹ ਜਹਾਜ਼ ਵਿੱਚ ਐਵੇਂ ਉਹਨੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੇ ਡਰਾਮਾ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕੀਤੀ ਤੇ ਬਸ ਟਾਈਮ ਤੇ ਹੀ ਚਲੇ he was so scared he went on time. We don't challenge such violations, we don't speak up, we don't write. You see, those days you didn't have Twitter and other things. अब तो ट्विटर वीडियो कैमरा अपलोड 1 सेकंड के अंदर आपको चलान पकड़ने के लिए आते हैं और आप वो निकाल लेते हैं कि क्यों भाई मैंने क्या किया, वो कहता है जाओ जान छोड़ो। अकाउंटेबिलिटी, पब्लिक अकाउंटेबिलिटी की ये फोरम्स आ गए।
At this point,
कभी बात में करते हैं।
so I think 7 o'clock already. We'll take a group photograph and then we'll have tea and we can keep the conversation going during the tea.
कर्सी में बैठे हुए मैडम, I think they've had enough.
We have a group photograph there and everyone can come. Thank you everyone. हम सब इधर आ जाते हैं photograph.